Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us today. It's nice to see lots of other people also interested in the impact of climate change and climate hazards on rural sanitation. I hope you're all well. And just to start the session, so my name is Ruhil. I'm a researcher at the Institute of Development Studies at the Sanitation Learning Hub in Brighton in the UK, and we are convening this session with our partners at the Institute for Sustainable Futures at the University Technology Sydney, with UNICEF Western Central Africa region, and also SNV Laos. Just some very quick housekeeping things. Please put your questions in the Pathable chat. That chat will be being monitored by my colleagues, and they will be answering your questions as we go along. We will also have time in the breakout groups later if you'd like to ask more questions or discuss a few more things. And it will also be a space for a more open discussion. Right, before I get into the presentations, just want to check if somebody can tell me if we have enough people, and then I can just move ahead. Okay, let's start then. Right, so today we are going to be looking at a session that establishes the linkages between climate hazards and their impact on sanitation and hygiene practices in different contexts. We're going to be looking at how we can respond to these vulnerabilities and realities, and also finally how to engage communities in these discussions on assessing the impact of climate hazards on their sanitation practices and the ways that they can respond to ensure continued access to comfortable and safely managed sanitation services, both during and also after climate hazards. So we will start with presenting our own experience, along with presentations from practitioners and researchers based in Burkina Faso and Laos. We will then break into breakout group discussions where we will discuss relevant themes. You can see the names of our breakout groups when you exit the session on the main conference web page for this session. And you are free to select the breakout group that interests you the most. And then also, we will, after the breakout groups, we will then reconvene and feedback what we've discussed. Thereafter, we will have some remarks from our panel made up of 3 people, where we have representatives from research, practice and practitioners, and then also a donor organization. So let's get right into our session. So why should we focus on rural sanitation and hygiene, but also climate change? So starting with some facts we already know, over 2 billion people still lack access to basic sanitation. Climate change and hazards are intensifying uncertainty and the impact of these hazards, which then increase public health risks for the poor, creates barriers to safe and comfortable sanitation and hygiene, and also increases the risk of slippage back into open defecation or partial toilet use. This is not something that is very new and something we already know, but the climate risks are greatest for those who are marginalized and who are already left out of existing programming and practice. So this is a quote from a rural sanitation practitioner based in Laos, and I will just pause here for a few seconds for you to read before I move on to the next slide. Okay, So to look into these issues further, the Institute for Sustainable Futures and us at the Hub, we undertook a review of climate and sanitation literature out there, and also relevant community-based adaptation literature. We interviewed 19 rural sanitation experts and practitioners based in countries across Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And we put all of this together in a Frontiers of Sanitation issue on climate change and sanitation, and it was published earlier this year in April. It establishes the links between rural sanitation and climate hazards, presents actionable ideas to understand and respond to these climate hazards within programming, and it also supports practitioners within civil society and government to add a climate lens to their existing sanitation and hygiene programs. One thing we really wanted to focus on was to put communities, people, and households at the center of these efforts. So they are very much the focus of this publication. Practitioners and researchers can also draw on various ideas and parts of this guidance to modify them to suit their specific context. This illustration you see is our contents page. It has a number of different sections, but today we will be presenting and discussing the various ways that climate hazards impact rural sanitation and hygiene practices, and the ways to assess and respond to these impacts within programming. But we have a lot more sections that we very much encourage you to take a look at. So in what ways is rural sanitation affected by climate and climate hazards and climate change? From our conversation, we identified 4 main kinds of impact. So slow onset events like droughts and desertification that happen over a long period of time incrementally. Shocks like cyclones and hurricanes that cause major disruption in a very short amount of time. Trends like increased average annual rainfall over the recent past. And then, of course, there is unpredictability and variability. So maybe changing rainfall patterns over an area, and then other hazards that would not have been expected in that region. There is, of course, overlap amongst all of this. For instance, trends of increased cyclone and hurricanes in the recent past. We also noticed a pattern on how these hazards impacted rural sanitation and hygiene practices, both directly and indirectly, in 4 main ways. So this was on impacts on behaviors, like increasing and continual disruption of facilities, causing a fatigue in people having to constantly patch up their toilets. Physical access to sanitation, like paths towards latrines becoming muddy or slippery. Livelihoods, in that if people did not want to prioritize sanitation when their main sources of income had been affected because of heavy rains or droughts. And also impact on access to resources and markets, where people would not have access to the materials that they would need to cope and manage to maintain their sanitation facilities. These are also some quotes from the work that we undertook. And these are from practitioners based across these regions. And I will again pause for you to have a quick read. Okay, so just on that, continuing on in the same vein, climate change impacts sanitation in various interlinking pathways. It can create or worsen climate hazards. The social context and local activities shape how these hazards affect physical access to sanitation infrastructure, access to local resources and markets, and the livelihoods needed to support safe sanitation. These impacts and the burden of responding to them are felt differently across according to the social context, and also negative impacts are disproportionately felt by people who are already vulnerable, which exacerbates existing inequalities. A complex array of social factors combine to create inequalities that cause some people to suffer more than others. For example, the amount to which people are exposed, the quality of their toilets, decision-making power, in terms of the ability to adapt and respond. Psychological factors like risk attitudes, trust, and expectations with authorities also contribute to determining whether people practice or change behaviors to respond. In terms of physical access, hazards can damage or destroy or disrupt the functionality of facilities, and it will make it particularly harder for older people or pregnant women or people with disabilities to access these facilities. Hazards can also cut off access to markets that provide products and services. And also, this is particularly for people living in very remote rural areas, and then also affect the availability of resources needed for construction and operation. It can also affect livelihoods, which in turn again affects their ability, monetary ability to meet sanitation needs. So therefore, climate change impacts sanitation in numerous interlinking pathways, which are complex, dynamic, cross-cutting, and nonlinear, and are interpreted very subjectively based on lived experience. So we need actionable ideas to understand and respond to these impacts on sanitation and hygiene. In our publication, and also these methods were also used in ongoing research in both Burkina and Laos. So one of these examples to assess climate impacts included a participatory way to assess climate impacts through identifying who was most responsible for various sanitation and hygiene related activities within a household, to then explore their responses according to the different seasons, dry and wet, and then also how workloads change, and then who faces the burden of decision making and responding. Another example in terms of responding to climate impacts is where you facilitated discussions with service providers and community members to think through ways of responding from within the community, like identifying what resources are needed to maintain sanitation access year-round, what products and services, if cut off, will prove crucial, and also how technologies can be modified to adapt for both changing seasons and also in personal needs. And then also, how can households be supported by programming to diversify their sanitation access to maintain access year-round. We also suggest 7 main principles to respond to impacts on rural sanitation and hygiene. So integrate considerations into existing programming, so we don't have to start from scratch. Trust that practitioners already have the knowledge and expertise to respond. Floods and droughts are very much already part of existing sanitation challenges that we face today. Focus on local knowledge and experience, and very much recognize that everybody will be impacted and will carry the burden of these responding differently. And then also recognize that climate change is cross-cutting. So practitioners involved in programming with agriculture and livelihoods, etc., will have very relevant ideas to contribute. Finally, also that regular reflection and learning processes can go a long way for programming to build on experience and on incremental learning with every intervention. I am now passing on to my colleague Karim Savadogo. He is a WASH specialist with UNICEF in Burkina Faso. He is in charge of the sanitation and hygiene unit there, and will be telling us more about their program and motivations for climate relevant research and thinking within their rural sanitation and hygiene work. Thereafter, we will be passing on to Dr. Leah Bartoy. She is a consultant with the Sanitation Learning Hub at present and is based at the Institute for Social Science Research in Burkina Faso, and will be telling us a bit more on her ongoing research on climate and sanitation in Burkina.
And just as a reminder to the audience, if you have questions for the presenters, please put them in the chat located right there in the conference platform. You will not find it on the Zoom. You will find it in the conference platform. Thank you.
Karim, over to you. If Karim isn't here, Daphne, are you able to take over?
Okay, maybe to save time, let's go to my presentation and then
we can come
maybe, yes. Can you move on my presentation?
Yes.
Sure. Thank you. My name is Leah Paritoe, and I'm a social scientist and consultant for IDS. I'm going to present you a case studies on climate change, impact on rural and sanitation. Please, next. Next, please. This research is conducted around three main research questions. How is climate change impact programming at the local level? How and where climate hazard affects sanitation facilities and infrastructure, and how practitioners address climate impact on sanitation. Sorry. This study is a participatory study did in 4 villages with 18 participatory focus group discussion and 35 individual interview. Please, next. Next, please. We are going to present you a few results regarding on direct and indirect impact on climate hazard on sanitation. The first topic is, what is the link between sanitation, hygiene, and health issue from community perspective? The data on the field show that, in general, there are a few links. People made a few links between the sanitation and health issue. But in the most of the interventional village of UNICEF and partner, the community established a good link between the sanitation and health issue. As you can see here in this quotation, by saying that with the sensitization of SNV on hygiene and sanitation, the construction of latrine was something that the people did not, and the whole village has adopted good manner. We now know the rationale for using latrine. We clean the village. We clean also our living environment. You can see that thanks to this, the sensitization, the people have a good knowledge by linking sanitation and hygiene. And next, please. Another topic is how try to know if the climate change is a reality from the community perspective. We can say yes, because in the field, the community perceive the impact of the climate change on their daily life, on the agriculture, the livestock, and so on. There are a lot of impact. As you can see in our quotation from the men, we say last year there was a big rain. My whole house collapsed. Also this year we had heavy raining with a lot of damage. What is the impact of climate change on sanitation? On the field, we notice that there are a lot of impact. We have here some quotation. A woman say, during the dry season, the lack of water is a real problem that makes us suffer. It's very complicated to clean the latrine and ensure the maintenance. And another say, the problem with latrine is that they are built in wood, and often it's scary when it's rain. the climate change is a big problem for the sanitation. A man say when latrine fell under the effect of heavy rain, many people go into nature to defecate. That means, please, next. That means we need to consider the impact on climate change to sanitation. If we were to ensure total sanitation and hygiene access for all by 2013, climate change is essential to be addressed because hazard can stop or even reverse the progress we have made so far. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Leah. I'm just going to hop over to Karim if he's able to. Yeah. Please go ahead, Karim.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. And just excuse me for the technical problems I had some minutes ago. Just to give you the background, sanitation background of the UNICEF country office in Burkina Faso. Our sanitation interventions are on 3 components: CLTS, washing school, and washing health care facilities. And we intervene in 4 main regions: the East region, the Sahel, the Central North, and the North and the Central West region. And we have something like 7 implementing partners putting in place the different projects, sanitation projects in these 4 regions. About the key achievement during the last 3 years, from 2018 to 2020, we have many achievements, but the main one is the celebration of the Sicily province last March, and this was a great achievement with something like more than 100 villages, ODF villages celebrated. And this was a big opportunity for the local and national government to be there and celebrate this great event. Now, about the key strategies and the way forwards to accelerate sanitation, I want just to mention that this morning I was at a national meeting with the government, and this is about how to accelerate sanitation in Burkina Faso. And we are trying to strengthen the environment, the sanitation environment is very important for us. And we try to strengthen the government responsibility about coordination and piloting sanitation interventions, and try to revise actually the CLTS documents. You know that UNICEF has put a lot of money in 2014 to set up the CLTS national documents, and now we are revising these documents to allow us to go and scale up the CLTS intervention. This means that we need to mobilize additional funds to fill the financial gap estimated to $10 million for the next 2 years. Next slide is about our motivations about research on sanitation. Just to remind that we have some challenges. The first one is the post-ODF sustainability. I told you that last March we celebrate the Sicily province ODF, but the main challenge is how to maintain this ODF status. And our motivations, essentially we want to identify and characterize climate change risk and the effects on sanitation intervention. And as Royal and Leah said, I think we are on the way to have the complete, to have the real idea on effects on sanitation intervention. We want to generate evidences to inform, the sanitation programming process in support to the government agenda. And we developed the next year's approach, and we think that the research finding will help to feed the next year's approach we have developed with the government. And as I said, we want to reinforce the post-ODF durability on different aspects, on the social, the behavioral, the technical, and material aspects. And to strengthen the community resilience through climate change, adaptation, and mitigation plans, local plans, help them to develop and put in place and implement these local plans. And finally, we think that sanitation could be a source of more mitigation of climate change effects through safe use of sanitation. That we can use some underproducts to develop sanitation. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Karim and Leah, for sharing your experiences and your ongoing research. I am now going to play a short video from our colleague Huang from SNV Laos, who couldn't be with us today because it's 3 a.m. or something in Laos. But she has prepared a short video for us based on their experience of working on climate and sanitation in Laos and using some of the participatory approaches that we outlined earlier. So if you could just bear with me for one moment and I will switch that on.
Hello, my name is Hong. I'm leading the WASH program for SNV in Laos PDR. I'm here today to share with you our experience in building local government's capacity to address climate change impact on rural sanitation program. Beyond the Finish Line project in Laos PDR is part of the SNV's SSH4A program that has been implemented in 18 countries in Asia and in Africa in the last 10 years. The project is funded by the Australian government through the Water for Women Fund. The project has 4 main components: WASH governance, sanitation demand creation, sanitation supply chain, and behavior change communication. SNV's main roles in this project is to provide technical support and to build capacity of the government and local partners through participatory and learning by doing processes to make sure that when the project ends, the local partners can scale up without heavily dependent on external support. The future rainfall trends in Laos are difficult to predict. However, most models indicate that there is likely an increase in the rainfall rather than decrease. With support from ISF, we have designed and delivered our first workshop on climate change to our government partners. The aim of the workshop was to increase the awareness on climate change and how it's linked to rural sanitation, and also to help the government to identify their roles and responsibility in integrating climate change into the sanitation program. Through a quick survey before the workshop, we know that 98% of our participants have never participated in any meeting or training on climate change. So we designed the workshop in a way that is easy to understand, participatory, and easy for participants to relate into their daily life and work. For example, The first session, we show them videos in Lao language showing the changes in the climate, how it affects people's life, what are different events that has happened in the last 10 years that are related to climate change. We also asked participants to reflect, to brainstorm on the climate change in their locations, in their personal experience, how it affects their life. We asked the group to draw a community map that clearly indicates how different locations are being affected by climate change event. For example, when floods happen, what happened to the water source, what happened to sanitation facilities. We asked government partners to play the roles of community member during crisis. For example, when heavy flooding happened, what happened to family who had to evacuate, what happened to an elderly person or person with disability who cannot get access to the toilets, what happened to a pregnant woman whose jobs are normally go out and collect water for the family. So through playing these roles, they have a better understanding of what's happening in the field, what the challenges people are facing. And one of the exercises, we asked them to vision what will they see Lao in 30 years' time, and what are the likely positive change, what are the big risks they might anticipate, and then we'll bring them back to year 2021 and ask them to think what can their roles be to make this vision to happen, or what can they do to mitigate the impact of those risks that they see. Through the two-day workshop, we've seen significant changes in participants' understanding and knowledge about climate change. For example, before the workshop, we see that almost 40% of participants indicate that they were confused, they have no idea about climate change and their impact on WASH. And 23% indicate that they have some vague idea, 33% say that they have few ideas. Together, almost 90% have indicated that they had no idea about, or very little idea about, climate change. However, after 2 days, we've seen significant changes in their knowledge and confidence. 76% of participants indicate that they're fairly confident in their knowledge understanding. Some are still a bit confused, and some still have some few ideas, but much better than before the workshop. And through reflection, we also learned that they have changes in attitude into dealing with climate change impact. For example, they said that we will move from treating flood as emergencies, and we react to it to a more proactive way of understanding what are the impacts, what are the risks, and what can we do beforehand to help mitigating these risks. They also have better understanding of challenges faced by people in the community, especially those who are more vulnerable. And the lesson learned we have from this is that climate change is a very new and difficult topic. So videos and visuals are good for introducing the topic. Case study, games, and role plays bring the difficult theory into life and make it easier for people to relate. And also, the role play have helped the government to have a better understanding of the community members' issues, challenges, and what can the government do to help them. So, building on experience from this workshop, we will continue to work with the district team to bring those participatory exercise and role plays into community to help them to have a better understanding of the impact of climate change on their life and what can be done to help them to mitigate those risks. And through the Water for Women's Fund, we will identify climate heroes. These could be government officials, could be sanitation suppliers, could be community members who are willing and ready to champion the changes in people's attitude, changes in understanding and knowledge about climate changes, and changes in their behavior. What can be done to mitigate the risks, the impact of climate change in general. That's the end of my PowerPoint. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you very much for listening to us and your patience. We are now moving on to the breakout group discussion. So please click out of the Zoom platform and go back to the UNC webpage where you will see 3 breakout group discussions at the bottom. And please click on the one that you would like to join. So
And as people are coming back from the breakouts, as you enter the room, be sure that you are muted if you're not already, and be sure that your video is turned off if it's not already. For all of our co-hosts, please do make sure that you have renamed yourself so that we know who you are in your picture screen. And I will hand things over to the group.
Right. Thank you all. And also very good to see you all back. I'm going to request the group facilitators to share their 3 main highlights from the group discussion. So maybe we've still not had all participants join, but maybe we should just go ahead for time. So maybe Jamie and then Petra, and then I can also then go. Do you want to start?
Okay, so three key issues.
Yes.
We had quite a quiet group, so and Anna, please do add some things if there's anything you wish which you think came up. But firstly, was in reference to the principles which were presented and the kind of need to be flexible. Lots of the changes which are taking place are very local, and so having a good understanding of the kind of vulnerabilities at a local level is important. I suppose there's the impacts of climate change, but there's also kind of different levels of understanding of the issues and different kind of capacities at different government levels, so all which need to be factored in. There was also the suggestion that WASH hasn't really been featured into the climate change discussion yet, which is why we thought we may have had quite a quiet group. And the third point of interest is, or reflection, at least from my side, is that lots of people are already operating in quite challenging environments, and there's maybe a fear or a nervousness about having to factor in climate change, although we're going to be forced to really, and if we want the outcomes we're working towards to be sustained in the long run, there is a real need to be asking these questions at the moment, and in ensuring there is these systems, both social and technical, are all resilient to shocks, whether they're slow or I can't. The 4 shocks you presented in the presentation, whether they're kind of persistent, slow onset. Yeah, so that's it from my side. Anna, is there anything to add?
No, I think you did a great job summarizing. The only thing I'll say is just that within the principles, I think it's, as you said, important to be flexible. But more than flexible, it's also, maybe it's not the same word. To me, it's 2 different words. Adaptable. You need to really be flexible, but also be looking for different solutions. As you said, to adapting to the context of the vulnerabilities in different places. One thing that I wanted to just emphasize the importance of the research. Extremely important to do this analysis, to measure it, to show it to politicians, policymakers, to the general public how important it is and how the impacts. Because this is the basis to, if you cannot measure it, you cannot manage it. So once you measure it, once you show it, then you can always also present possibilities for financing. And I think there are some mechanisms in different countries, of course, like green climate funds and whatnot. Difficult to get, of course, but important to bring the thematic up to policymakers and decision makers, and within the climate context, there are funds and financing, and that has to be prioritized. Because often we're just reacting and trying to address situations. I mean, they all commented that, there's so much need that you just want to deliver on the needs, but it's really important to consider aspects of the need to prioritize and also think of climate resilient measures for what. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie and Anna. Petra, can I request you to maybe feedback the 3 main highlights, but also very quickly, because I think we're a bit pressed for time. So maybe in a couple of minutes.
We were a very small group, so it should be quick. I think the main thing that we talked about was that there is a lot of awareness now of climate change impacts on sanitation, but what's still missing is really how do we take the next step, because we're missing research evidence and practical examples of what we can do. So we need some more research, and particularly action research, of trying things out and then being able to look towards that evidence to find strategies for the context that we're in. That was one point. Then we were talking about some of the technologies that we need, and some of the strategies and tools are already available from previous WASH experience, but how do we scale them in that particular context of climate change? From there, we came, of course, to the human component. So it's not just the technology that we need, but what do we do in terms of preparing and supporting and empowering local communities, households, and individual people to respond. And we also talked about the authorities. So how do we engage governments and institutions? How do we get political will, and how do we get commitment? Because there might be a lot of talk about climate change, but the actual follow through in terms of budgets and in terms of political support is missing. And of course, also with some of these technological components that we may know of, they're often adapted to an urban context, but what do we do in the rural context where technology needs to be much simpler to be maintained over time? People need to be supported to engage with the technology over time. So these were some of the discussion points.
Thank you very much, Petra. And also just to very quickly feedback that in our group, we discussed climate sensitive versus climate transformative. So addressing just the symptomatic impacts, or also just looking deeper into even addressing or reversing some of the effects of climate change. And also very much that climate hazards and these realities are already ongoing. So they need to prepare managers, users, other people dealing with these things. And that the idea of thinking through climate hazards was perhaps more easier than climate change, because hazards were definable sort of floods or droughts rather than a change that we needed to chart over a period of time. We also had some input that disaster reduction and recovery tools and guides were really good and accessible on community action planning and issues around that. And then also the importance of local voices, culture, local knowledge, and then also helping communities both learn within themselves, but also across similar contexts. And then also, yeah, I think, yeah, those were all the main points. Just to quickly move on now, I would like to invite our panelists to share some short remarks. Can we please start with Anna Gren, and then we can move on to Jolyan Molit, and then Anisha Nijwan. Just to quickly introduce them, Anna is a senior program specialist at the Department for International Organizations and Policy Support at the Swedish International Development and Cooperation Agency, SIDA. Jolyan is a WASH specialist at UNICEF's Western Central Africa office and oversees sanitation and hygiene programming in 24 countries across the region. And Anisha is a research associate at the University of Bristol in the UK, and is currently working on resilience assessments of on-site sanitation, rural water supply, water safety plans, and risk mapping. So maybe over to you, Anna, and then Jolyan, and then Anisha.
Thank you so much. I'll just say very quickly, I mean, I think that much of the discussions, that the summaries of what you said, I completely agree with, and just really important to try and everybody has to try to take concrete steps. I think UNICEF right now, they have a new global strategy, and they are really emphasizing aspects on WASH and climate resilience, and it's a work in progress, but they've been able to really take some concrete steps. So we really look forward to seeing some of that work, and I think the research that IDS is doing, of course, and is highly relevant. So considering possibilities to maybe develop some specific indicators that, as I said before, it's difficult to do, and then at the same time consider all the social vulnerability, but it really is important to measure things and to try to bring those results to policymakers, to have this political support, which will hopefully enable financing as well, in order to be concretely have programming that does not leave anybody behind, of course. Yeah, so please do. I mean, I think it's extremely important to work across cross-sectoral coordination, because although it's climate and water and WASH, we really do need to work across all the different spectrums of different agencies, infrastructure, public works, environment, health, agriculture, and of course finance. And I think this is where you need to also try to mainstream and bring these aspects to the policymakers. And the World Bank, the Water Global Practice has been doing quite a lot of work also on climate. So also consider, getting this knowledge up to those. I'm thinking globally, of course, is a different way of when we're working locally, but I think at the global level, there are many structures that are taking place, and because of the fact that climate change takes so much, has a big agenda, it's really important to make sure it continues to mainstream climate change into sanitation policies and vice versa. I'll stop there since we only have a few more minutes. Thank you.
Please go ahead, Jolyon.
Great. So thanks so much again to IDS for inviting us to be part of this discussion. And really, I'd like to acknowledge our partnership in West and Central Africa. I think it's really, a first step towards getting some practical information on, how climate change is affecting communities in our region, as well as, what are they doing, if any, to adapt to these changes. And I hope that we'll be able to continue doing this type of research by using participatory methods in additional countries moving forward. I would say in our region, like I said, we have 24 countries and many are very keen to shift towards climate resilient wash services. As Anna said, UNICEF globally has committed to making all of our programs climate resilient for wash. And we've also developed, in collaboration with the Global Water Partnership, climate resilient wash framework to kind of help build the capacity of country offices and our partners in order to make this shift. And I would say from the water aspect, we do have a lot more information and concrete ideas on how to make this shift happen. But for sanitation, we still need much more information, both on the climate change mitigation aspect, as well as on the adaptation aspects, to really integrate this into how we program, particularly in our at-scale community-based sanitation programs. I would say that the studies that we've heard about today in Burkina Faso and Laos are one step to making this shift very practical with some practical evidence and also some practical kind of concrete ideas for both communities and local governments on how they can take action on this using their means, and also what support they might need in order for them to actually act on this. And I think this focus on strengthening the resilience of communities, building their capacity, increasing their assets, decreasing their exposure to hazards, etc., will really help us to sustain the gains we've made over the years in sanitation. And while we all acknowledge, I think that we still need to do much more, and we're still a long way off from reaching the SDGs for sanitation. I think we've made a lot of progress in the last decade on sanitation. Like in Burkina Faso, for example, in our region, it has one of the fastest rates of decreasing open defecation by 8% since the start of the SDGs. So, as we move forward, we want to make sure that we continue to sustain those gains, but also accelerate the pace of change. And I don't think we'll be able to do this if we don't take it into account and program, for climate resilience or climate change resilience. I think particularly in our region, again, as many of you might know, West and Central Africa were often faced with increasing fragility, increasing insecurity, and we have multiple countries that have been identified as some of the most vulnerable to climate change worldwide, particularly in the Sahel, so Niger, Chad, Mali, Burkina Faso, etc. And some of these countries in particular already have some of the lowest rates of access to sanitation. So I think by trying to understand, how we can program better for climate resilient sanitation services, we have this opportunity not only to sustain the gains, but also at the same time accelerate the pace of change. And I think moving forward, I would suggest maybe 3 areas to continue, pursuing in order to advance our work on this topic. The first is to really kind of continue to replicate, adapt as needed, and also test some of these community-based participatory research methodologies that we've heard about today. And I hope we get to see more from the Sanitation and Learning Hub so that we can continue to gather rigorous evidence on how climate change is affecting sanitation services. And I think this information, as Anna said, financing is very important for sanitation, which is so often underfunded. So if we have more information and evidence from the grant, this can also help input into the climate rationales of country proposals and concept notes for climate finance, which can contribute to increasing our resource base for sanitation. I would say the second, area of work we need to pursue is really to expand the scope of our partnerships beyond the wash sector to address this, very large topic of climate resilient sanitation services. Because we know that there are lots of government departments already working on climate change. Someone mentioned disaster risk reduction, agriculture, the environment sector is very active on this, even the private sector in many countries. So we need to more systematically work together in order for us to actually make sure that sanitation is integrated into the national policies and strategies that are in place to address to address climate change. And the third, I think in general, and I think the Sanitation and Learning Hub is particularly good at this, facilitating this, is to just continue sharing and discussing between different organizations and actors working on climate resilient sanitation services, so that we're able to kind of advance this topic at a faster rate instead of just pursuing our own research and evidence generation agendas on our own. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jolyon. Anisha, over to you. You're muted, Anisha.
Can you hear me now? Great. Someone had to do it. So thank you for having me on this event. Just some reflections from a research point of view. I think both Anna and Jolyon mentioned it. Petra mentioned it from her breakout session, and I think it also came out in the breakout room I was in. The idea of needing evidence, or trying to address evidence gaps on how, well, first of all, I suppose, what do we mean by climate change? And I think the point about talking about climate hazards or ongoing climate variability instead of climate change is an excellent point, and it really helps to push our thinking forward and moving from research into action. The second thing that really I think I want to talk about is, again, from a research point of view, I spend a lot of time thinking about, well, we say resilience or vulnerability, but what would that actually look like? What are some of the things that communities are doing, and how do we measure the impact that they're having? We at the University of Bristol, we've been working on developing an indicator framework for both rural water supplies and for on-site sanitation systems. And we're testing the framework for on-site sanitation in Nepal, Uganda, and Ethiopia. Now, there are two challenges for me. One is in terms of on-site sanitation systems, there are different facilities, there are users, but then there could be holding stations, fecal sludge management facilities, there's disposal. So this is quite geographically spread out. Where do we collect data? How many households do we talk to? Which actors are we talking to? So that's one. But then the other is sort of towards the validation of these metrics. Our research projects are generally a year, 2 years at most. If communities are lucky, that's not enough time in which a massive event, such as a big flood or a landslide, will occur. And so to me, the idea of collecting enough data for validation of these metrics is also a challenge. Like Jolyon mentioned, well, these community adaptations, technical adaptations, what works? How do we collect data to know what works? I'm glad that we're having more events about talking about sanitation. I think people, including myself, are guilty of sometimes focusing a lot on water supplies and not paying as much attention to sanitation. So events like these, I think, are helpful. And support by partners like UNICEF for our framework is also now proving to be quite useful because there's the scale, there's the capacity for further testing. And then lastly, I am aware of time, but I think that something that we're also focusing on in our research is actually looking at the greenhouse gas emissions from systems like pit latrines. So it's not just about adaptation, but also mitigation, which I think University of Leeds has a model that they've developed. And so we're testing that as well. And I think that will be helpful in developing this further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, Jolly, and Anisha. All very relevant, very important things we need to be thinking about and focusing on. I'm aware we're about 2 minutes over time, so I'm not going to take lots more time from all of you. Thank you very much for joining our session today. If you want to contact us for anything, I've put my email in the chat, and this is also a link to our Frontiers of Sanitation webpage where you'll find a lot of what we've discussed today. In case you also want to get in touch with any of us who spoke today and want to know anything more, please get in touch with me and I can connect you with the people who are relevant. I think that's it. Thank you for joining. Does anybody have any last things to say before we log off?
I just want to also encourage people to continue these conversations in other spaces in this conference, but also, for example, on the Susanna a discussion forum that some of you may be familiar with. We had some threads earlier to share some experiences and needs and knowledge gaps there. So please, if this is an area that you're interested in, I would really encourage you to post there or post in other forums that you're part of to keep the discussion going and evolving. And as Jolyon said, to keep making those linkages between organizations, between people, so that we can evolve this knowledge together as we move along.
Just want to say thank you so much for inviting me. I didn't have the chance to say that at the beginning. Thank you.
Yeah. Great, then that's it. Thank you all for joining. Please get in touch if you would like to know more, or or if you have any questions for us, really. And I look forward to seeing you all in other settings and maybe even in person. We'll see. See you, and thank you for joining.